Wade, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
All right. My name's Wade Tisthammer. I have a YouTube channel called Maverick Christian. Also got a Twitter feed there. I'm a philosophy graduate student. Sometimes I delve into apologetics. And so...
You messing with the autofocus?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I usually just turn mine off and just like manually set it once at the beginning.
Yeah, it's usually better about this. Anyway, so I was... Maybe I should do manual focus. Okay. Yeah, so like I was saying, philosophy grad student, YouTube Maverick Christian. I'm a Minnesotan. I live in Minnesota. I grew up in a Christian home. I kind of started questioning my faith when I was around high school or so. Maybe we'll get to kind of argument that sort of convinced me that God probably exists if we have time to do that. Let's see. I'm on the autism spectrum, and I kind of suffered from depression for a little while. And yeah, I think in some ways you're similar to me. We're both also nearsighted.
Cool. I'm an atheist, by which I mean I believe that everything we see in the universe is best explained by naturalism, physicalism, no need for the existence of God. I don't think there is any evidence for the existence of God. Could you tell me some of the reasons you believe there are for belief in a God?
Sure. So I think there's a significant evidence in favor of theism, but one of the things that I learned when you study philosophy is that a lot of this just boils down to different intuitive perceptions. So one of the nice things about arguments is that even if they can't convince like someone else, you can at least find intuitive points of divergence to find out where people's intuitive perceptions differ. So I have some slides in favor of that.
Oh, you just unshared your screen.
Oh, how about now? Is it sharing now?
Now it's shared. I think you reshared it because I didn't unshare it before.
Yeah. So all right. And slideshow from current slide. All right. So this, I think, in my opinion, is a big Achilles heel for atheism. It's one of the reasons why I am not an atheist. So there's a moral argument is actually a few arguments that use morality as evidence for God. So we can boil it down to, for this little presentation, the awareness of morality, the existence of morality, not logical explanation of morality, but it's important to understand what I mean by morality. So moral obligations have an ought component. Morally wrong for someone only if they do it. But what type of ought are we using here? And this is where I think atheists and theists can sometimes talk past each other because they might not be using the moral ought in the same way. So some types of oughts are descriptive. It has that type of ought that has only descriptive characteristics. So an example would be when if you want to do well in school, you ought to study just means something like as a matter of practical necessity, you need to study to do well in school. But there's that other type of ought we use that's what we could call a prescriptive ought, for lack of a better term. It's that type of ought that is not really descriptive. So for example, when someone says you should not torture infants just for fun, they might be using this type of ought, that type of ought that does not have only descriptive characteristics. And so the moral ought, how morality is normally used, and by most people, albeit not everyone, is that it's that prescriptive ought. That is, it's false that the moral ought has no properties besides really descriptive ones. So an action is only obligatory only if they prescriptively ought to do it. So again, as a warning, some non-theists have moral semantics where moral oughts are purely descriptive, where they have only descriptive characteristics. So argument for moral knowledge goes like this. If God does not exist, then we do not have moral knowledge. We do have moral knowledge, and therefore God exists. So for the second premise, relatively easy to point out. Just point to an example of something we know it's wrong to torture infants just for fun, and therefore we don't have moral knowledge. Now, again, that's one premise one could deny. They could say, well, I don't see any reason to believe that it's wrong to torture infants just for fun. I don't think that's plausible, but some people's intuitive perceptions differ. So an important part about morality and the moral semantics that I'm using is that morality is non-natural. Now, by deontic moral facts and properties, I mean facts and properties having to do with moral obligation, like moral wrongness. Actions moral wrong for someone if they ought not to do it. So here's like a very quick oversimplified argument for morality being non-natural in the moral semantics I'm using. All natural facts, facts of chemistry, physics, etc., are descriptive, like electric charge, mass, inertia, all those are descriptive facts. But deontic moral facts are not descriptive facts. Deontic moral properties do not have only descriptive characteristics. So therefore, deontic moral facts are not natural facts. If you want to dig deeper, I go into this more rigorously and like some math and symbolic logic. But yeah, we don't have to go into that right now. So how do you know that moral wrongness exists? So one idea is that we know moral wrongness exists because we can empirically detect it. We can see things that are morally wrong. But the problem is that moral wrongness is non-natural. So barring the supernatural, like supernatural clairvoyance, anything outside the natural world can't causally interact with the natural world. So we can't empirically detect it. To illustrate, imagine a moral nihilist and a moral realist observe some jerk kicking a dog just for fun. The dog whimpers and pains and runs away. Now, imagine two observers agreeing all the same physiological and psychological facts. For example, the dog felt pain and suffered minor injury. Now, one person says, I don't think moral wrongness is attached to that action, a moral nihilist who thinks nothing is morally wrong. Another person says, I think moral wrongness is attached to that action. There's no empirical way to determine who is right here. Both views, moral nihilism and moral realism, are empirically identical. That's what I mean when I say that moral properties are empirically undetectable. They agree on all the same empirically observable facts. So if we can't empirically observe morality, how do we know about it? Well, moral wrongness is empirically undetectable. In practice, we rely on intuition to believe that moral wrongness exists. Just seems true to us that moral wrongness exists. So how does our moral experience, that is our moral intuition, properly justify our belief in morality? Well, on theism, a theist could believe that God designed our cognitive faculties in such a way that when they're functioning properly, intuitively apprehend morality's existence, or certain elementary moral truths, like it being wrong to torture innocent sentient life just for fun. So on atheism, it seems that physical processes of which evolution plays a role produce the moral intuition. And while this might give us belief in morality, it wouldn't provide moral knowledge. This is largely because barring the supernatural, moral wrongness is caused inherent. Its existence would have zero effect over the natural physical world, including whether our brains would produce moral intuitions. Another way to think about it is that we'd have the same intuitions of morality existing, regardless of whether morality existed. And that would seem to undercut such intuition, properly justifying our belief in morality, too. Use an analogy. Suppose Sally uses a metal detector and believes there is metal underground solely on the basis of the detector's report. But this metal detector is faulty. The detector reports there's metal underneath it, regardless of whether such metal exists. That would seem to undercut the metal detector's report from properly justifying the belief that there is metal underground. So even if there were metal underground, Sally's belief wouldn't be knowledge. The application for atheism is that barring the supernatural, our brains would give us the same intuitions of morality existence, regardless of whether morality existed. And that would seem to undercut such intuition from properly justifying our belief in morality. We might have true belief, but it wouldn't be knowledge. Just like the metal detector case scenario. And so on atheism, it seems like it wouldn't have any good reason to believe that morality exists. I mean, suppose Sally, for example, finds out that the metal detector finds out that it would report that there is metal underneath, regardless of whether there is such metal. Well, that would undercut Sally's belief that there is metal hidden underground. She wouldn't have any good reason to believe that such metal exists. All right, so to justify premise one of the moral argument, it suffices to show that moral knowledge is unlikely if God does not exist. So, for example, it's a theorem that given A, probably C entails probably if A, then C. And for math and logic nerds, that's what it looks like. So us having moral knowledge is unlikely on atheism. It entails probably if atheism is true, then we do not have moral knowledge. That's the result of that theorem I mentioned before. And if you want to see proof of the theorem, I have that on my blog as shown here. So now technically the atheists kidding around the moral knowledge is impossible and naturalism problem by invoking the supernatural, like supernatural powers, clairvoyance, but it seems far-fetched. Given atheism, it seems unlikely that we do have moral knowledge. So my previous argument about, if barring the supernatural, our brains would give us the intuitions of moral knowledge, give us the intuitions of morality existing, regardless of whether it existed. That assumed naturalism. While you could get around it by supernatural clairvoyance, it seems far-fetched, and so it seems, given God's non-existence, it is likely that we do not have moral knowledge. So that's our awareness of reality. The existence of reality actually builds upon that. So premise, God does not exist, nothing is morally wrong. Some things are morally wrong, therefore God exists. And again, example is torturing if it's just for fun. Now, as a warning, the first premise doesn't say God is necessary for morality. It says that moral wrongness can't exist It doesn't say that morality can't exist without God. It says moral reality doesn't exist without God. To show that one is probably true suffices to show that moral wrongness probably doesn't exist given God's non-existence, using that theorem I mentioned before. Given A probably C entails probably if A then C. So given God's non-existence, moral wrongness doesn't exist entails that the first premise is probably true. So here's how the case works. Given atheism, we don't have any good reason to believe that moral wrongness exists. And the second prong is given atheism, we have prima facie justification to believe that moral wrongness probably doesn't exist. Prima facie justification being we're justified in believing something given any absence to the contrary. So, as I mentioned, it kind of builds upon the previous argument, the argument for moral knowledge. Moral wrongness is non-natural, empirically undetectable. We have the faulty metal detector analogy to illustrate why. So what about the second one here? Well, we can use the argument from queerness. To give an example illustration, suppose I say there is an invisible unicorn floating above my head. So that's possible, but not plausible to be justified in believing this unicorn does not exist. The invisible unicorn wildly diverges from the types of things we know exist to make it prima facie unlikely. That same principle holds true for morality on atheism, I think. Moral wrongness is invisible and non-natural. We need something like supernatural clairvoyance to know it exists. And so with that second part justified, so justification for premise one is given atheism, it is likely that moral wrongness does not exist. We don't have any good reason to believe that moral wrongness exists. We have prima facie justification to believe that moral wrongness probably does not exist. But atheism, another way to look at it, is that moral wrongness is very strange. It's invisible, non-physical, and empirically undetectable, probably supernatural at least. So why shouldn't the consistent atheist reject the existence of this invisible, non-physical thing that can't be empirically detected if the atheists reject the existence of invisible, non-physical deities that have allegedly not been empirically detected? So given atheism seems more likely that people's belief in moral wrongness is delusion brought about by evolution to get us to behave in certain ways and help our species survive. And given atheism, moral wrongness probably doesn't exist. So that third part, which will go pretty quickly here, ontological explanation of morality. So the deductive moral argument says that morality is unlikely given God's non-existence, but it does delve further into the connection between morality and God. Now, moral ontology is a discipline of studies that deals with the grounding morality, how it exists. So given that non-natural morality exists, how does it exist? Well, what is morality? It's a non-natural component of reality. It has these supremely authoritative obligations for us, and everybody ought to obey its dictates. And it's God. Well, God has a non-natural component of reality that has these supremely authoritative obligations for us, and everyone ought to obey its dictates. And I see, yeah. So morality is suspiciously godlike. I see I may have goofed on the slides here. It's kind of going on Malcolm Reynolds on me. All right, so a priori, morality is suspiciously godlike. It provides a very straightforward ontological explanation for morality. And a priori, it is surprising on atheism that such non-natural, supremely authoritative component of reality would exist compared to atheism. So I think that theism makes morality evidence for theism in favor of atheism. All right, I'll just do this. So one objection, holy crap. One objection is that if morality were grounded in God, then God could have commanded for us to, for example, torture infants.
Yeah, we can just stop with the slides. I don't like, none of it's addressing any of my points anyway. So let's just go back to the beginning. Your argument for God is morality. Morality is best explained by evolution. There is no evidence for any kind of morality. Beyond that, you have to make a bunch of inferences to go beyond that. I'm a moral realist, so I of course believe there is objective morality. You can have that without a God. I think that's probably the best place to start. So best thing is morality. The best evidence for morality is purely evolution, physical. There's no supernatural evidence of any supernatural, any kind of morality whatsoever. So your argument's debunked from that stage initially. Now, I agree that we should hypothesize about objective morality and try to make predictions to.
So I'm a bit confused here. So which premise are you tackling?
Oh, I'm not going to address anything you said in your slides. Just a waste of time. So first thing, morality is best supported by evolution. It's just, if you disagree with that, you're just disagreeing with everything in science. Secondly, if there is objective morality, the better explanation is going to be naturalism. Moral naturalism is the best explanation of morality. Positing other things is just baseless. So why do you think that I mean, first, you'd probably comment on the fact that there is no evidence for morality beyond evolution. That's a problem. Secondly, even if there is, it's going to indicate naturalism is better. You are muted?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
You are muted again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So, in a logically valid argument, the truth of the premises is evidence.
I don't care about the argument. So just tell me, what is your objections to specifically what I said? One, the best evidence is evolution is a product of evolution. There is nothing outside of that in any scientific field. Secondly, even if we grant there is an objective morality, why do you think the naturalistic moral naturalism is not a better explanation?
Well, my first objection is that what you said doesn't address the evidence I offered for theism. The second objection is why moral naturalism doesn't work.
Why would moral naturalism be a worse explanation than theistic naturalism or theistic morality?
So moral naturalism is the idea that moral facts and properties are reducible to natural facts and properties.
Yes.
Now, why do I think moral naturalism is false? Well, it's because it sounds like we might be using a different moral semantics. That's why I defined morality earlier in those slides. So my definition of morality is that where the moral ought does not have only descriptive characteristics, would entail that moral non-naturalism is true, that something like moral wrongness would be a non-natural property.
Well, there's two problems there. One is that oughts could be purely natural. There's no reason to think they can't be. Secondly, I agree there aren't any oughts, but more importantly, a morality without oughts is a more rational morality anyway. Like moralities that entail oughts are significantly less rational and entail more philosophical problems, have less explanatory power, don't correspond to reality. So just taking out the oughts makes a better model anyway.
Okay, so it sounds like you disbelieve in the type of morality that I had defined earlier when I did my slides. Because the type of morality I had in mind did have moral oughts. Like an action is morally wrong for someone only if they ought not to do it. And that type of ought was that type of ought that is not purely descriptive. So it sounds like you would disagree with the premise that we do have moral knowledge, that morality exists in the sense that I had defined it in the slide.
Well, it's true, but I'm making a more general argument here. I'm saying moralities that specifically reject that are epistemically better. So models of morality that don't have oughts are better models of morality, regardless of whether or not I accept one or the other.
Well, if you define morality in the sense that you get rid of that moral ought component, I don't really think morality in the normal sense of the term. I think what people say, an action is morally wrong, they have in mind an ought component. And if you don't have that, you don't have morality in the normal sense of the term. So you could define morality so that you don't have the moral ought, or that moral oughts are entirely descriptive. But I think at that point, you're really just changing the subject. You're not dealing with morality.
Your volume is like going up and down. It's breaking up a little bit.
Oh, what is wrong with the audio here? Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So you could define.
I heard what you said. So I don't care. The typical way it's used doesn't make a difference here. What morality is it's a sensation we get when we perceive certain action. So we see someone torturing a baby for fun. We see, we feel that's immoral. So whatever is causing those feelings is morality. It's just de facto that's the case. What people tend to think the word means is irrelevant. It's just not evidence of anything.
Well, it is relevant because we need to have effective communications between atheists and theists. We have to know where we're coming from. So, for example, if you said, I do believe in morality, and a theist says, well, I think morality's existence is unlikely if God doesn't exist, and here's why. What could potentially happen is people are talking past each other. So when theists normally...
let me give you an example. If someone says water is that stuff we see that's wet and whatever, and I define it as having the magical property of bloof, and someone says, well, no, I agree, water is that stuff, but it has no property of bloof. Someone simply saying, well, most people include the property of bloof is just irrelevant. Water is a thing in reality. Our definitions that we apply to it is just irrelevant. It means nothing.
No, I think you must understand. In those situations, people having disagreement about the property of water, but it wouldn't be a disagreement about the definition of water. When I talk about moral semantics, I mean that the type of ought being not purely descriptive. This is what people mean by morality. This is what I mean by morality. It's part of the definition.
I was including that. So if I say, I mean by water, H2O plus magic, and this is water. and someone says, well, I agree that these are the physical things that we see, this thing we see is water, but you adding in this magic stuff by definition is just you making shit up. I don't care about that at all. There is water and it is that thing, but you don't get to add in whatever definitions you want because it makes you feel good. There is a thing in reality to which this word corresponds, and it gets to define all of the properties of the thing, and your personal opinion just don't matter.
Well, in that very bizarre example, you would have to say that what you call water does not exist. There's not anything in
Yes.
reality that exemplifies the predicates that you've attached to the meaning of that term.
Yes.
But I've said, I think it's important going forward when you discuss with other theists is that when you say, I believe morality exists, it should be important to keep in mind that it's not the same sense of morality that a theist use when they use the moral argument.
Well, of course. I mean, most theists have a completely delusional perspective of morality that has no correspondence to reality whatsoever. So I agree with that. But when I use morality, I use it in the way in which the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy uses it, which includes simply, it has a broad spectrum that can include all of these definitions. The theist definition included is a possibility here, but it's not the philosophical meaning of the term. So
what do you think what do you think the theist definition of morality is exactly?
Well, specifically the one you're including with oughts. Oughts are not required in morality at all. There are multiple versions of morality philosophically that don't include oughts. Like again, moral naturalism, there are many versions of moral naturalism that don't include oughts, and they're purely descriptive, as you mentioned. So the fact that you are taking this particular definition of morality that entails oughts in this way is simply you begging the question. That is not actually the philosophical definition of morality. That's your particular definition of morality.
Well, it's not just my particular definition. Most of the most people use this type of definition where they have moral oughts built in.
Yeah, but that's not the definition of morality. That's your definition. As I mentioned,
so
philosophically, the definition of morality is a larger bubble that includes many different definitions. And so by me using the definition in the academic sense, and you are particularly picking one definition that you like the best, it's just not relevant. I don't care. So
no, I'm
what
not
morality,
picking...
what morality actually is fundamentally, the only thing it qualifies as is the sensations we have when we see people do things either right or wrong. That's it. There is no other thing you get to add to the definition. De facto, this is what it is. And whatever is causing that is morality. Now, it could just be subjective, it could just be evolutionary, whatever. But whatever is causing these is fundamentally morality. And then you would have to argue beyond that, that this is being caused by some kind of objective ought statement or something, et cetera, et cetera. But fundamentally, all you need for an explanation of morality is the core grounding of whatever these experiences are.
Okay, there is no God of the English language that decides what words should mean. So I
don't. The words literally don't matter. There is a sensation. There is an empirical sensation, and this word corresponds to that sensation. You don't get any alternatives here.
All right. So as I was saying, there is no God of the English language who decides what the correct or incorrect words are the meaning. So the most we can. So I won't quibble on whether my morality definition is like correct or incorrect because that's all semantics. So I'll just leave the point where when most people use the term morality, they have in mind the moral ought. Now, the philosophical definition of morality, there isn't even any the philosophical definition of morality. Different philosophers can mean different things by different terms. It's unfortunate, but unfortunately, that's the way it is. So a philosopher could use morality as you defined it, referring merely to experiences, but they can also use it to define morality differently.
So you don't get a definition here. So this is independent of definition. When the word morality, the way it's been used throughout all history by every human being ever, no matter what, no exceptions, refers to an experience you have. So like pain, the word pain refers to an experience you have. You don't get to define it. You don't get to apply definitions to it. It refers to an actual experience. Morality also refers to an experience. And so that's what morality is. There's no exceptions.
I disagree. I don't think that the word morality does refer to that. I think when most people use the word morality, they're not referring to that experience. They're referring to, what people should and should not do in that not purely descriptive sense. But we can agree to disagree there and move on to a different argument.
No, that's kind of important here. So why do you think this idea that people ought or oughtn't do something, where do you think people got the idea there was such an imperative?
Well, I think many people intuitively recognize that there is such a thing as people morally should and shouldn't happen. That involves that involves experiencing it, but it'd be a conflation to conflate the experience with a thing that one believes one is experiencing. But anyway,
No,
this is
so
all
they have an
semantics.
experience, and then they think that experience corresponds to reality. So that part I agree with. But the way they got these terms was they had an experience, they had a feeling about that experience, and they thought that feeling corresponds to reality. So the core of what morality is comes from a feeling, a sensation, an experience. They experience a feeling from seeing some kind of an action take place. So morality is a word that refers to an experience.
No, I don't think it does. Just because we use experience to believe in morality doesn't mean that the term morality itself refers to that experience. It refers to the thing that's being experienced. Even if that thing being experienced is like, for example, suppose I say a sun and I say that bright orb in the sky. Now,
Yeah.
when I say the sun, I'm not referring to the experience. I'm referring to something that presumably corresponds to the objectively real world.
Well, that's begging the question. So when we first come up with, say we lived, I don't know, 5,000 years ago and we see the sun and we're trying to discover, is the sun really there or is it a delusion? At this context, when we use the word sun, we are simply referring to the experience because we have no evidence of anything else there. We don't know about how far away it is or what it's made of. We know nothing. All we know is that it's an experience. And so the word sun is only allowed to refer to the experience until such time as we have evidence that there is more there for it to correspond to. And so simply assuming that the word sun would apply to more would be begging the question
No,
for your
I don't think
conclusion.
that works. I mean, you could just say that if you say whether the sun is a delusion or not, or whether the sun exists or not, you could say the question would be, okay, is there a thing in the universe that exemplifies the predicates contained in this definition?
Well, no. So again, you could say someone could come up with a definition. The sun is of the god Helios. There's this guy who has horses and he's pulling it, and that's it. Like obviously that's a dumb definition. But everything that they are using to refer to the definition of the sun is their experience, and then they're adding this other stuff from their imagination. Now you could say, well, oh, well, then your definition doesn't exist, but that's just them being delusional. In reality, what they are calling the sun does exist because what they are referring to is their experience. That's fundamentally what they're referring to, whether they realize it or not. They're just adding in a whole bunch of imaginary gibberish that just doesn't matter to the argument. So in philosophy, what morality refers to is the experiences. Now we don't know what that's caused by, but we agree that it's real. We agree that it's objective. We're both moral realists, and
No,
we
we're
want to
not.
know.
We're not. You don't believe that the morality as I defined exists. You're a moral anti-realist with respect to the moral semantics I'm
Well, this
using.
this is why the religious perspective is so gibberish, because that's like saying that someone who defines the sun as uh, being pulled by the god Helios with horses, when there's literally no evidence to correspond to that, and they're just saying from the direct experience they have, which is evidence of some kind, they're adding in all this gibberish with no evidence, and then they're defining the entire concept around that imagined concept,
Well,
and
no,
saying that, oh,
that's not
that's
what's
exactly what
going.
you're doing. That's exactly what you're
No,
doing. So it is. So we have
no, I'm using
we have
moral
something that we have
semantics that
one
most
part.
people.
No, you're making shit up is what it's called. Is the technical term, making shit up. So we have one thing that we actually have good evidence for, the experiences of morality. Everybody agrees that's a real thing. Yes. And then you're taking this and adding on this gibberish about aughts and supernatural gods and stuff. That's all gibberish, which is the same as looking at the sun and saying, oh, there's a guy up there with some horses and some string and he's pulling this thing. No evidence of that whatsoever. That's just making shit up. So the fact that in that culture that was the common belief of the time period doesn't matter. Literally no one cares. It's irrelevant. But we both agree the sun exists, even though you define it differently because you've added up all this made up shit that just isn't there. What we really mean, how language works in the brain, just from linguistics in general, is the word we use, sun, corresponds to the experience, and then from that we try to discover what is causing the experience. You don't get to add on your made up definitions and say this is the sun. Like no, it's not.
Okay, I think you're conflating definitions with beliefs about the thing being defined. So, for example, myself and a belief that the gods, um, make the sun go around. We can agree on the same definition of the sun, namely that bright orb on the sky, but can
Well,
have
no,
different.
because I'm saying that that's in the definition. What you're doing is you're taking guy on horse and saying, "Oh, this is a part of the definition." It's not. No, it's not. That is a mistake you have made. The same thing with the
So,
morality. Saying oughts are a part of the definition of morality. No, that's a mistake you've made. Just like saying that horses must be a part of sun. No, it's not.
so do you think that morality having that ought component? Do you think that is not part of most people's moral semantics?
It would not make a difference. One, no, it's not. It's not actually, but and there have been studies on it. It's not, but it doesn't make a difference.
There have been studies on it. I would like very much to see these studies
Sure,
that
Stanford
say,
Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Moral Naturalism.
okay, does that entry contain a study that most lay people do not use the moral semantics?
Well, I
that
care
I've
even
outlined?
less what lay people mean by the term, but
Okay, but this is what
I've already debunked your entire argument here. So it doesn't matter what most people use by the term. I addressed this earlier. Even if most people define sun as, in the definition of the sun, entails Helios on a carriage with horses, that doesn't matter. It's irrelevant with how they define it. Doesn't make a difference. The sun still exists because it refers to an experience, and the fact that they've added in a bunch of bullshit to their experience that has no evidence to support it, they don't get to then say, well, I'm going to include this made up shit in my definition of sun. It doesn't work that way. Sun, the way linguistics work fundamentally is that words correspond to experiences, and you don't get to add in whatever you want to those experiences. So yes, I am a moral realist. I believe in objective morality, like most academic philosophers, most atheist academic philosophers, and you don't need oughts for that. And the fact that you include them is just a red herring. Like, I don't care.
Okay, the reason why it's important is I think some people, they say, I believe in moral realism, but they use, I believe in morality, but they use morality in a non-standard sense. They use it differently from the lay people to say. Now, you could say that doesn't matter. The reason why it matters, at least when having discussions, is that some people can talk past each other. And so when you say, I accept this premise, when you don't accept the premise as because you're using morality in kind of a non-standard way, that can inhibit communication.
So like, if there is a thing to which it corresponds to in reality, that supervenes all subjective definitions. So what you mean by it just doesn't matter. If you say by water I mean a unicorn, and if we're having a conversation about water and water is actually H2O, it corresponds to something in reality, my definition wins. It just doesn't matter how many people disagree with it, mine wins.
What do you mean when you say a definition? I don't even know what it means to say a definition to win over the other.
Mine corresponds to reality. It's true. Yours is false.
Okay, so by a definition winning, you mean that the concept as defined is instantiated in reality.
No, I mean that when we use the term and it corresponds to some experience that is actually representative of some cause in reality, and the word more accurately describes the property of the thing causing that experience, it's more corresponds to reality. So like if I define the sun as a ball of hydrogen in the sky or whatever, and you define it as a ball of hydrogen being pulled by a guy in a carriage with some horses, my definition more accurately corresponds to reality, so mine wins.
But so when you said no, it seems you meant yes, because that's exactly what I said. Oh, anyway, so I can go on to the next argument. So basically, you're just to be clear here, you disagree that morality, as I define it, is instantiated in reality, and that would be the premises you reject in those particular arguments.
Sure, but I'm going further than that. I'm saying that a model of morality without oughts is epistemically better. And I also think it corresponds to reality more. But both of those things would mean that your definition is wrong.
Well, I don't think there's any right or wrong definition apart from what people use, but I'll move on. So here is, go on to the next argument.
Well, no, I don't care about your arguments. I'm still on mine. So only evidence of morality is it's from evolution. There is no evidence of objective morality. Secondly, the morality, if I believe it does exist as a moral realist, that corresponds to reality. The one that we only have evidence for, the best evidence for, is moral naturalism over God.
Okay, so are we done? Can we move on to the next argument?
Well, no, you're supposed to like respond to that because that would kind of
well, my response. I've already made my response to that. My response is, I think
that you define it differently. That's the only response. Like,
well, it's not just that I define it differently. It's that most people, this is what they have used.
I'm not understanding. So if I say my definition of water is H2O, hydrogen, oxygen, I'd say that thing that we see is water in the way that I define it. And you say, no, that thing that I see is water in the way I define it. One of us is right and one of us is wrong, right?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, there is no God of the English language deciding which terms are correct, which definitions are correct or incorrect.
Wait. So like, if we're looking at are you still there?
Yeah. So, okay. I mean, yes. So when I say definitions are correct or incorrect, I always say yes or no, because whether a definition is correct or incorrect depends on what standard you're using.
Wait. So if we look at a body of water and I say water is hydrogen, oxygen, and you say water is hydrogen, oxygen, and magic, and there's some fact of the matter. In reality, it's the proposition is either one of these is true and one of these is false. This definition, water is H2O, is either true or false. And the definition water is H2O plus magic is either true or false. One of these is correct, one of these is incorrect, right?
So, well, yes and no. The proposition that water is H2O versus the proposition that water is H2O and magic, one of those is true and one of those is false.
Yes.
But which definition are we using? Are we using an intentional definition or are we using a sense adequate definition? Which type of definition are you using?
Well, when we say something is objectively true, it means it corresponds to reality independent of opinions. And so we're trying to get our definitions to correspond to the reality of the thing.
That doesn't answer my question.
Right, because your question is irrelevant here. So if we
no,
want,
it doesn't. When you say is a definition correct?
So if we're moral realists, or we're realists of any kind, that means we say the thing that we are defining corresponds to something in reality. It's there. It's a correct definition. The definition corresponds to reality. That's what correct definition means. And okay, so if we say water is H2O, that definition, for it to be correct, means it corresponds to reality. If you say water is H2O plus magic, for that definition to be correct, it would have to correspond to reality. One of these corresponds, one of these does not. So the correct definition is the one that corresponds to reality. If morality is an objective feature of reality like water, then our definitions, the better one is the one that actually corresponds to whatever morality is in reality.
Okay, so when you say a definition corresponds to reality, do you mean that the predicates mentioned that definition are instantiated in reality? Is that
gibberish.
What you mean by?
I have no idea what you're asking here. It's too much gibberish.
Gibberish. This is okay. I guess I should probably take it. So I'm a philosophy student. I kind of know this philosophy stuff.
Yes, I am too. But your gibberish is just irrelevant here. So
no, these are gibberish.
Back to predicates. Go back to folks, stay on the topic. Kid, stay on the topic. So, do you understand that when we use definitions, we try to make them correct? It means they correspond to reality, right? So, well, again, some set of properties. What?
It depends what you mean by when you say a definition corresponds to reality. Now, when you say a definition corresponds to reality, what exactly do you mean by that? Do you mean that this definition fits with what most people mean by the term, or do you mean that the thing
that's like the stupidest question? When someone says corresponds to reality, no, they do not mean what people mean by the term.
No, I mean talk about definition corresponding to reality.
No, I don't care. Like, this is so stupid. What people mean by the words, nobody gives a shit about. We want to know something that's true independent of all people. That with no people exist, it's still true. That's what we want. Objective truth. Corresponds to reality means objective truth. Nobody gets a definition. Definitions are gone. Some set of propositions that are true independent of definitions.
Okay, when you say that a definition corresponds to reality, then presumably you don't mean that this is the definition that most people tend to use. This is a standard term. Do you mean by a definition corresponding to reality that the thing that's being described by the definition?
You cut out again. Your mic stopped working again. Still can't hear you.
What is wrong with this thing?
Now I can hear you.
Okay. So
there should be on your screen, there should be a little bar underneath that is like green when you talk.
I don't see any.
No. I mean, on the window, like you can see when you're making noise and when you're not on the screen, because there's a green bar.
I don't seem to see any green bar on the window that indicates that.
So like there's a picture of you and me on the top left, and beneath the picture there should be like a green sound bar where you can.
Oh, a vertical. Yourself. Well, I see vertical bar, but it's just always green. It hasn't turned off.
All right.
Anyway, so when you say a definition corresponds to reality, you do not mean that this is the way that this is a standard way that people mean what they mean by when they use by the term. Right. You mean. When you say a definition corresponds to reality, do you mean that the thing described by the definition actually exists in reality? Is that what you mean by definition?
That's closer to what I mean. Yes.
Okay. That we kind of have to disagree on whether the kind of layperson sense of morality exists in reality. Now, yeah, we just disagree about whether that layperson sense of morality actually obtains in reality. And that would be our point of disagreement, our point of intuitive divergence.
Right. So if we're both trying to describe what morality is, and you say the common person's definition is this, and I say that doesn't accurately correspond to what morality is. Morality does exist. My definition is what actually exists, and that is a thing in reality. Then mine is the correct definition because mine exists, yours does not.
I wouldn't say it's the correct definition because I think we're using different. Apparently, we're using different definitions of what a correct definition is. But again, we can disagree on the semantics of that. We can disagree on the semantics of morality. We can disagree of semantics about what a correct definition is. Since
okay, but I don't care about definitions. I care about reality. So my definition exists in reality. Yours doesn't. I win. I don't care about use for definitions.
All right. Yeah, it seems like you also have a different definition of what. All right, I'll just go on. We're disputing semantics at this point. We can move on to a different argument.
Well, you still haven't addressed mine. Like mine is.
I have already
morality
addressed
is better explained by naturalism. Your definitions don't matter because mine correspond to reality. Yours don't. Mine more likely to correspond to reality. Mine have more explanatory power than yours do.
I've already addressed it. My response is we're using different semantics of what morality is. You don't believe that morality as I exist, morality as I've defined it, as layperson defined it, exists. And so since you disagree with that premise, that's our point of divergence. And we're probably better moving on to a different topic.
That doesn't matter. So if I say I agree, I don't agree with your definition. I think your definition is wrong. Your definition doesn't correspond to reality. Mine does. That means like if you say phlogiston is the cause of fire moving, I'm like, no, it doesn't. Here's the empirical evidence. And you're like, oh, well, you just disagree with my definition. You've lost the debate. You're done. You've essentially just admitted you're wrong and you have no relevance anymore. I'm like, okay, but I now win. So mine has evidence. Mine has a better definition because it corresponds to reality. Like, so simply saying I don't agree with your definition isn't an objection. It's not a criticism of.
I think it is an objection, but. Again, we can move on because you just define terms differently.
Well, again, that's not an objection. So you saying that is just you admitting you lose. So I'm hoping you have something a little more substantive.
Well, the fact that you use a different semantics than I do doesn't really do anything to show that any premise of my argument is false or unjustified. You just disagree that morality as I've defined it exists, and that's our disagreement. We disagree.
No, I'm not saying. I'm saying that that your definition is false. The premise that entails that definition is a false premise. There is my premise that entails my definition is a true premise.
They think that my definition is false. Okay, so we have a number of problems here that boil down to semantics. We disagree over what the term how we're using morality. You disagree over what it means to have a correct definition and so forth. Yeah, we're better off just going to a different argument, I think.
Okay.
So let's see. I have another argument we can use.
You don't need the slides. You can just tell me.
Well, I think the slides help a lot to explain it. Let's see. Okay, can you see my screen?
No.
Oh, I thought I shared it. Let's try this again. All right.
Now I can see it.
Okay. So, arguments for theism. So I have a couple here. They basically use the same type of reasoning. So we can have two conceivable universes. The way we can see the universe conceivably could have been like. One is a randomized hard drive universe, a universe akin to a randomized hard drive, a chaotic, jumbled mess, disorderly, unpredictable behavior at every moment. But there's another type of conceivable universe, what we could call a software universe, a universe akin to complex computer program with sophisticated mathematical algorithms directing behavior. Universe with the consistent mathematical patterns ubiquitously imprinted to nature via physical laws, such that it makes physics almost ludicrously successful in precisely predicting behavior. Examples include relativity and quantum mechanics. So the physical laws are akin to behaviors directed in an orderly and predictable fashion. So here's an example of what I mean by software. Here's an equation and an algorithm the universe has for kinetic energy.
Can you like what's the argument exactly? Because none of this is relevant. Absolutely none of your slides are helping me at all. What is the argument?
I haven't got to that yet. I'm explaining certain aspects of what I'm talking about.
I don't need that. Just tell me why do you think the fine tuning is evidence of God versus non-God?
I didn't. This is not about fine tuning. I didn't even.
Oh, it's not fine tuning. Teleological on this. All right, what's your argument? Just tell me some arguments. What is the argument?
All right, I'm getting to that.
No. Just tell me now.
Okay. So let's get to that here. So here's one argument. If God does not exist, then the applicability of mathematics, that is our universe being a software universe and a randomized hard drive universe, is just a happy coincidence. Applicability of
Premise
mathematics
one is false. It can be a determined factor of nature.
okay.
There
Well,
you go.
I haven't finished yet. Applicability of mathematics is not just a happy coincidence. Therefore, God exists. Now, you could argue that
false dichotomy fallacy.
Okay, unfortunately, I don't think you're quite understanding my argument, but it's not entirely your fault because I haven't finished describing what my argument is. Now, you could object to say that the mathematics in the universe, as well as psychophysical harmony that I haven't gone to yet, is metaphysically necessary.
Yeah. Or it could be a brute fact. That's true too.
Yeah. So, physical harmony.
Do we
I'll get that here. Just
we don't need the slides. Like, they are not helpful. What is the argument?
Well, they're helpful to explain what my position is, because I don't think I quite understand what my current slide. So psychophysical harmony.
I'm the one viewing them, and I'm telling you they're not helpful. They don't in any way help. So it's incorrect to say that they're helpful. They're not. Just what's the argument?
Okay, metaphysical. I'll just skip that. So metaphysical necessity objection. So an argument assumes that the explananda, whether software universe or psychophysical harmony is metaphysically contingent, the universe could have been different in those respects. Perhaps the explananda, that is the things to be explained, are metaphysically necessary, would have obtained even without a designer. So my objection to that is that it proves too much. Think of an illustration. Suppose a meteor shower hit the moon to spell out there is a cosmic designer, a supernaturally fine-tuned certain parameters so this message would appear. Now, suppose we discover that, yes, indeed, if certain initial parameters of the early universe were altered, even slightly, no meteor shower text could appear. Now, imagine someone says, this is not evidence for a designer because perhaps the initial parameters were metaphysically necessary. Now, this rebuttal, I think, clearly doesn't work, but why doesn't it work?
Because we have prior evidence of designers who do these kinds of things. That's why it doesn't work, but it has nothing to do with the origin of the universe.
We have no evidence that of prior supernatural designers of the universe. At any rate, in addition to
no, like if something is spelled out on the moon through a meteor shower, the reason that we can infer that's designed is because we have lots of evidence of things that are designed that correspond to these kinds of languages, and things that are not designed, that are like rock patterns or grass patterns or whatever. And so if we didn't have that, if all we had in the universe was just a moon with this spelled out, you could not infer this was made by a mind. So the only reason you can is because we have prior evidence of things being designed by minds and what they look like, and that's it.
So why could the metaphysically necessary objection work here? You could just say, well, it's metaphysically necessary that these fine-tuned parameters of the universe will work out that way.
It would. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that in this case, where all we have is a moon with some writing, saying that it's metaphysically necessary is equally as good as any other explanation there. It's random, it's designed, anything. If you have no other prior data to infer one is more likely than the other, then they're all equally likely.
Okay, so in this scenario, a meteor shower hits the moon to spell out these words. And we discover that certain parameters are indeed fine-tuned so that if they're altered even slightly, no meteor shower text would appear. So do you think this metaphysically necessary objection would be a good one? Would this rebuttal work?
Yes, unless we have other prior data of things in the universe, then yes, they're all equal.
All right, and let's see here. Okay, so you're gonna just bite the bullet and say, in that fine-tuned meteor shower scenario, the fine-tuned meteor shower would not be evidence of design, because that metaphysically necessary objection would actually work.
Yes, unless we already know the pre-standard conditions of the universe and what it would actually come about. We have no reason to believe that there's any kind of intelligence changing those things. So, for example, if we're looking at the fine-tuning of the universe in some way, there's nothing in the fine-tuning that indicates a mind whatsoever. It's could be equally as plausibly explained by a randomness, just pure randomness, a brute fact, necessity, or the best explanation is the one in physics of the fine structure constant being indicative of some supervening law that interconnects them all and causes a proportional pattern in them. And that's the best explanation. That's the only one that has evidence that's better than the God one. Why would the fine structure constant be a worse explanation than non-physical minds which have no evidence?
Well, I think we do have a lot of evidence for it, but one of the reasons so what we have here is there's this thing that roughly goes, one philosopher's modus ponens is another's modus tollens. I might have gotten those switched around. But it seems to me that if we did find a if it were a fine-tuned meteor shower, if
Forget the meteor shower, it's a false analogy.
No, it's not false analogy.
It is a false analogy. I don't want to go into the false analogy. So tell me, just in this physics, the constants in the universe. I agree. If we change any of the constants slightly, no life. Okay. But why do you think that would be indicative of a designer as opposed to undiscovered law that is intertangling the forces to have a certain proportionality?
I'm not using the fine-tuning argument. That was never a part of my teleological arguments. Unfortunately, you didn't let me finish my presentation, so we didn't quite get the idea. Mine was on the fact that we live in a software universe rather than a randomized hard drive universe. The other one was psychophysical harmony. It seems extremely coincidental that we do have are you familiar with the psychophysical harmony thing?
I think I've heard Inspiring Philosophy mention it sometime.
All right. Would you like me to explain it?
Sure.
All right. So
I don't need the slides. Please don't bring up the slides. They're a complete waste.
Okay. I'll see if I can stop sharing here. We have might not help you, but they might help your viewers.
They are making fun of it.
It might help your viewers correctly understand my position. You sure you don't want to use the slides?
Yes, I'm sure. Please don't put the slides up.
So psychophysical harmony, we have brain states. Our physiology produces both behavior and experiences. So for example, imagine someone like puts their hand in the fire, they feel pain and they pull away. So there is a matchup between experiences and behavior.
Okay.
But that behavior, as we've observed, is harmonious. For example, here's another. There are many different conceivable relations between experiences and behavior. So, for example, imagine somebody puts their hand in the fire and they pull it away, but doing so, they experience pleasure rather than pain.
Yeah.
So that is one conceivable psychophysical relation. Psychophysical being kind of relations between like mental experiences and physiology. Very roughly, that's what psychophysical means. And we can think of other sorts of basically kind of like garbage associations. Like imagine someone puts their hand in the fire and it's injured and they pull it away, but instead of feeling pain or pleasure, they feel like, kind of like a TV static experience. And if they do something else, they might have like a slightly different static experience. So the point is that our mental experiences are harmoniously linked to the physical world. And out of the numerous conceivable psychophysical relations we can conceive, most of the conceivable ones will be garbage. They'll diverge wildly from one's external environment. But in our case, we do have this psychophysical harmonious relations. Like, for example, when I see you, my sensory experiences are presumably that of an objectively physical world, when conceivably we could be behaving, making the same physiological movements, but have entirely different mental experiences. Sure. So the fact that we seem to have psychophysical harmony at all, I mean, if I were an atheist, it seems like, well, it seems very coincidental that we do have these harmonious physical relation. A priori, there's really no reason to expect it on atheism. And so the fact that we do have a psycho-harmonious relation is evidence for design. Same thing with the software, that we live in a software universe rather than a randomized hard drive universe. Now, you could say let's start. It's metaphysically necessary.
Pause. So there's two things there. One, there is some phenomenon we see. There's a harmonious between our psychophysical interactions or whatever. Under atheism, there isn't an expected reason to do that, obviously, because atheism doesn't posit anything, but we could obviously make something up. We could make up a law. It doesn't need to be necessary. It could be contingent, it could be brute fact, whatever. It doesn't make a difference. We could make up a potential explanation that would increase the probability of that happening, just like theism. Therefore, there's equal probability of both atheism, naturalism, or theism explaining this. There's no a priori reason to prefer one or the other.
Well, I didn't get to finish, but so here's kind of where I was going. This, given atheism and that I exist, that I have a mental experience of, say, human-like complexity mental experiences. Given atheism and I have mental experience.
Let's go just naturalism. So why would naturalism, which there's infinitely many versions of naturalism that I can posit a law that determines whatever I want. And there could be a law that causes a determining factor between psychological experiences and motivations or whatever, just like there could be a God to do that. So why would one be more plausible than the other?
Okay, so if you allow me to finish, I can kind of explain my reasoning.
I mean, I don't just tell me, answer my question. Why would a naturalist explanation of a determining factor between these two be less plausible than a God determining factor between these two?
Okay, so to explain my reasoning, if naturalism, and given that I have a mental experience, that I have a mental state, the odds are, just given those two facts, the odds are overwhelmingly in favor, epistemically probability speaking, just given those two information, by far the most likely is that I'm basically living in a dream world, that I basically have like a garbage mental state.
No. Remember, so the premise of my argument is that there is a determining factor that your beliefs will correspond
I'm getting to that,
reality.
but you keep interrupting me. So if you
Well,
like,
no.
low down
What you
the
said, the first
interruptions.
premise you said was wrong. The overwhelming probability that no, if what I'm saying is there is a determining factor, then the overwhelming probability could just be one. There's 100% probability your beliefs will correspond to reality, depending on what I want to make up this thing to be. So the point of this argument is to show that you have made up a sky daddy and you have pretended the sky daddy has a particular nature to cause us to have beliefs that correspond to reality. That's nice. I can make up a quantum field that has a particular nature that causes us to have beliefs that correspond to reality. We can both make shit up. So why do you think your made up shit is different than my made up shit?
Okay, so if you allow me to continue, now, given naturalism, by naturalism I mean just like there's nothing supernatural. Nothing supernatural. Combine that with the fact that I have a mental experience of human type complexity. Given just those two propositions, the episode is overwhelmingly likely that I have a dreamlike garbage mental state.
Oh, no, that's false. That's
because
just demonstrably false. Like, I don't know how you're getting nothing that you said, none of the conclusions followed from the premises there. That's
okay,
complete gibberish.
If you allow me to finish.
So like naturalism on its own, suppose you're right. There is naturalism with no supernaturalism whatsoever. That tells us nothing about what the naturalism is going to make us do. So there could be a kind of naturalism that makes it determined that we're going to all believe in magical puppies. Like, who knows? There's no statistical variance there saying that if there is no supernatural, anything in the natural is affected. Nothing. So the probability of, suppose there is a world of nothing but natural, and suppose there is a world of nothing but supernatural, or suppose there's a middle world of a combination of both, the probability of any particular belief under all three systems is exactly identical. And if you think there's some difference, then why do you think there's a difference there?
Okay, so I'll try explaining again. So given naturalism, there's nothing supernatural, and given just that I have a mental experience, the odds given just those two propositions is I'm overwhelmingly more likely to have some sort of garbage mental state that wildly diverges from reality. Because
okay, but that's the exact same as the supernatural. So
because please let me finish. There are numerous conceivable mental states. So imagine like I'm lying in bed
supernatural
and dreaming. Imagine I'm lying in bed dreaming. Out of most of the conceivable mentals, I'm rarely dreaming about lying in bed, because out of the most conceivable mental states of a certain complexity, most of those are going to wildly diverge.
You still have not presented a symmetry breaker. So all of that is still true. The world is only supernatural.
If you stop interrupting me, I could get to this.
Well, you're just gibberishing over and over again. Like, it shouldn't be too hard to say the symmetry breaker is X.
Now, on theism, there are such things as God would presumably like to have moral agents, and for moral agents to interact,
yes, you have a made-up determining factor. I can have a made-up determining factor too.
For there to be moral agents, we would have to basically not live in a dream world. So on theism, it's arguably more likely that
that's false. But again, that's not a differentiating factor. So again, as I said, if there's a world of just natural, the probability that our beliefs or ideas correspond to reality is whatever. It's very small, just on a logical conceivability metric. If there's just a world of nothing but supernatural, the probability our beliefs correspond to reality is the exact same logical possibility metric.
Well, now, again, I don't think you're understanding my argument. I wasn't comparing naturalism to supernaturalism. I was comparing naturalism to theism.
Okay, so theism. Say there's just theism. The logical possibility of spectrum of possible gods is exactly the same as the logical possibility of spectrum of possible universes. So the probability of us existing in a universe of naturalism with no God and having a belief of any kind is exactly the same in a universe with a God of having a belief of a particular kind.
I disagree.
Okay, why?
Well, I've already explained why, but I mean, to give an idea of like differing intuitive, I think the type of theism I'm talking about is one with moral agents. Now, you could say, well, you can conceive of a type of deity that is not interested in creating moral agents.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Let's pause right there. So you have a particular idea of theism, which entails this very specific version of all logical possible kinds of theism, which entails moral agents. Now, that's fine, but that's now you're taking the broad logical possible spectrum and isolating a very particular kind. Now, I can do the same thing under naturalism. I can say, under naturalism, I define naturalism to entail this particular quantum law that entails that that minds will exist and that they will have some kind of relevant ideas about the things that exist. And now I've taken the broad spectrum of all logically possible versions of naturalism and isolated down to a particular kind that I like. Now, if we're comparing the two, the broad logical spectrums are equivalent under theism and naturalism, and the particular versions that we've particularly isolated also have the exact same probabilities, even though they're slightly higher than the broad spectrum. So what is the symmetry breaker here between these two?
Okay, to help illustrate my point of view, consider again the fine-tuned meteor shower scenario. You could posit a form of naturalism that says, well, these fine-tuned parameters resulting in the meteor shower, well, my version of naturalism says that these parameters exist in the absence of designer. And what's more, these parameters are not only physically necessary, they're metaphysically necessary. And now a theist could say, well, it seems more likely on theism that this type of meteor shower text would appear. It seems more likely to happen than if theism were false.
And so false analogy because you're talking about human language, which is a not relevant analogy to the laws of the universe. So what is your analogy between the words on the moon and what was it we were specifically talking about? Like minds corresponding to reality or something? How is looking at words on a moon analogous to a mind having ideas that describe reality?
Okay, if you please allow me to finish. All right.
No, just answer my question.
I'm trying to answer it.
No, you're trying to finish. I don't want you to finish. I want you to ask a different question. Answer a different question, which is, since it's a false analogy, why do you think words on a moon is analogous?
I don't believe it's a false analogy. I'm trying to explain why.
Okay, well, that's what my question was about.
So, in the fine-tuned meteor shower scenario, a naturalist could say, well, these parameters are physically necessary. And you could project it a god or a theism that says, well, on theism, you're just positing the same thing. A theism that results has these fine-tuned meteor shower text. So what's the symmetry breaker there? So in my opinion, a symmetry breaker there is if you can chop down naturalism so that it's very narrow, I think you're lowering the prior probability of naturalism. Now, could you say that one is doing the same thing for theism? Well, yes and no. I think that on theism, just like bare theism, it seems the type of thing that's more likely if theism is true than if naturalism were false. That's most people's intuitive impression. And I think that applies here.
Wait, what was that? Say that again. I didn't understand what you just said.
Okay. So if you look in that fine-tuned meteor shower scenario, I think it's most people kind of get this intuitive perception that says this type of meteor shower text, it is more likely to occur if there were a designer of the universe than if it were not.
Yeah, that's because words are made by minds, and we don't have any examples of words made by not minds. If words
yes, we do.
Up,
of course, the naturalists could say we do have an example of words not made by minds.
I don't say that. So that's not.
And that is
wait. So if we were discovering everywhere in the sand there are just A's and B's and C's all the time, anywhere in the universe, independent of minds, and they just happen because of rock sand or something, then no one would intuitively conclude that seeing these shapes in the pattern on a moon would be a product of minds, because it was something we see all over the nature. And in the context of the original conversation of do our ideas correspond to reality, we see that happen all the time in nature without a designer. And so it would be irrational to think that this is a accurate analogy by looking at words which only appear by minds and looking at my ideas corresponding to reality, which don't only happen due to designers, and think that this is an equivalent analogy. It's not.
Well, we only see them happen in nature because nature is designed in such a way to have that.
Now, begging the question.
Huh?
Begging the question. What
begs the question?
Saying that the only reason we see them as nature is because nature was designed to do that, or something along those lines.
All right, I misspoke here. This is probably bad. That was probably a bad word to use. We can see that nature is like this. Now, what is the explanation for this psychophysical harmony? One idea is that, well, epistemically speaking, we just got really, really lucky that our psychophysical relations happen to be this way. Another way is through design. Now, you could say, well, it's just metaphysically necessary to be that way. You could, but you could.
it could be determined. It could be highly probable. It could be completely random. It could be a brute fact. It could be a god. All of those things are possible. I mean, so when you say metaphysically necessary, a god doing it makes it metaphysically necessary.
Well,
It's
not
equally
necessarily. Metaphysically necessary.
well, I would agree. I would agree. So what I'm saying here is just like God could be 100% metaphysically determined to make things way X, or he could have some kind of variability in his choice making abilities. The universe could also be metaphysically necessary to produce exactly this thing, or it could have some kind of randomness probability that has a high probability that this will happen. So just like there's a spectrum among what God could do, there's an equal spectrum among what nature and determining forces could do, randomness added whatever, to give the same probabilistic distribution under both naturalism and theism.
So I kind of disagree with that for reasons I've mentioned earlier. You could say,
what reasons?
Well, all right. Well, think of the fine-tuned meteor shower scenario. You could say, well, we've never seen nature do it.
Okay, let's forget the false analogy. I've already try to bring up some actual relevant something here. So why do you think that you seem to be trying to say that because we see words and words are only written by humans, therefore, how is that not
that's not my argument at all.
How is that not it? Because it seems like your argument is like most people intuitively, when we see words, think it's correspondent to a mind. Therefore, if we saw words on the moon, we would think it corresponds to a mind. That seemed to be your argument.
No, that wasn't quite my argument. So what I was using the fine-tuned meteor shower scenario is to illustrate some people's point of view about what seems more likely if the universe were product of design than if it were not. Okay, well maybe this will help. Maybe. You've heard of the claims of intelligent design theory, that the idea that life was created by a designing intelligence.
Yeah,
now, perhaps now here's a different analogy. Imagine that scientists found that the probability that life on Earth would result is, if it were a result of undirected natural processes, the probability was akin to a tornado sweeping through a junkyard to assemble an airplane. Now, if we found that, would that be evidence in favor of the idea that life was designed?
No.
It wouldn't, even then.
No, because that would be an argument from ignorance, saying that the probability of life coming about randomly is 1 in X doesn't tell us at all what the probability is of it being designed. So the probability of it being designed there would still be 0 until.
So it's not an argument from ignorance. It's arguing from what we do know, which is the probability that life would come about in the absence of any designer is extremely low as to be negligible.
Well, no,
that is what the argument is.
That's not how it works. That's one of the fallacies of intelligent design, why it's a pseudoscience. Even if we say the probability of life coming about through natural processes is extremely low, which is not, but even if we say that, that doesn't give any probability that life coming about through design is high. That has 0 probability. There's no probability for that because of the difference between discovered and asserted properties. So to use a more blatant example, saying that what is the probability that a horse or that an elephant made a footprint in Antarctica? It's very low that was a probability. But to say, therefore, this footprint that looks like an elephant must have been done by a Yeti would be incorrect. It'd be an argument from ignorance. It's saying this can't be explained by X, therefore it's Y. Argument from ignorance. The same thing would apply to the design argument here. You're not allowed to say that from the evidence we know that the life coming about by natural processes is very low, therefore it's evidence of magic, because it's an argument from ignorance. We don't have any.
I didn't say it was evidence of magic. That's not what I said at all.
Right. That was, I'm moving there. So if it's design, would be the same thing. Until we actually have evidence of any kinds of minds that exist outside of humans, then to say that life originated from a designer is equally as ridiculous as saying it originated from magic. So no, you cannot say that because the probability of life occurring naturally is low given the currently known laws of physics. Therefore, this would be evidence of an alternative hypothesis that has no evidence. That would be an argument from ignorance, regardless of whether it's magic or God design.
Well, that's not an argument from ignorance under the ordinary conception of the term.
Yes, it is. But it's literally what it is.
And it's arguing from what we do know, not arguing from what. Okay, what exactly do you think the argument from ignorance is?
We don't know X, therefore Y.
Well, usually along the time of like we don't X, therefore Y. Yeah, that's not what the argument did at all. The
so saying that your methodology can't do X, that's a you don't know X. Therefore,
no,
Y.
that's not what it means at all. My gosh, you're not really understanding the argument.
So saying that something is really improbable given some method is to say that that method can't do this. So this method cannot accomplish the task. Now that isn't actually evidence that there is some other method that can do it. All that's saying is that this method can't accomplish the task. Therefore, this other method is more likely. That is an argument from ignorance.
Well, okay, so the argument from ignorance basically takes the form of P has not been proven false, therefore P is true.
No.
You don't think that's what the argument from it is, that because P has not been proven true, therefore P is false, or that P is false because it hasn't been proven true. You don't think that's what the argument from ignorance is?
It's one version.
Okay, that's one version. You're apparently, I think you might be using a somewhat non-standard definition of the term argument from ignorance.
No, I'm not.
I'll leave that slide.
You're incorrect. You're still not addressing the argument.
Can you remind me what your argument is again? You said it's an argument from ignorance.
You're saying that because of this method can't do it, my method is right. Saying that if you have, for example, say there's 10 axles, first 9 are broken, is that evidence that the 10th axle works?
It depends. Do we have, if there are,
this is 100% of the data we have. There's no external data. We have 10 axles. We know the first 9 are broken. Is that evidence the 10th axle works?
Well, if we don't have information that one of the axles, at least one of the axles is working, then yes. If we don't have evidence that at least one of the axles is working, then the argument would not work.
Correct. So simply saying that if we know with 100% certainty that the 9 axles, like the probability of those 9 axles doing it is 0%, it doesn't add evidence that 10th axle is doing it. So the same thing would apply to this context. So simply saying that the probability of life coming from non-life given known natural processes is very low. We can just give it 0. Say the probability of life coming from known natural processes is 0. Does that mean it's designed? Is that evidence of design? Well, no, because there's other options here which we haven't explored, which is unknown natural causes. So the problem. So it'd be like
you're not really understanding the argument at all, I'm afraid.
What I'm literally describing exactly what it is.
No, you were misstating the argument. Here, I'll try again. So in my hypothetical scenario, the probability, so life, we know that in this hypothetical scenario, we know that life came about on Earth. Somehow life came about on Earth. And we know that the probability of life coming about through undirected natural processes, that is non-intelligent causes, is extremely low.
Known natural processes.
No, that's not what this scenario is. But in this scenario, we've determined that the probability of undirected natural processes, that is non-intelligent processes, resulting in life on Earth is extremely low, on the order of, say, a tornado going through a junkyard and assembling a plane. That was the scenario.
Okay.
So, I mean, if it were true that non-intelligent causes did not bring about life, and we know that life came about, then the only alternative is designing intelligence. It seems at that point, scientists would maybe adopt directed panspermia or some other form of intelligence design.
Because you'd first have to show that designing intelligence could actually do it. You'd again need to establish that that's possible first.
So you don't think a designing intelligence is capable of creating Earth-type life?
Not if one doesn't exist, no.
Well, I guess that would be one. I don't know if many scientists would take that position under that circumstances, but
well, that's the consensus right now, is that the reason intelligence design is a pseudoscience is because you haven't actually shown there is any evidence of a designer. So the better explanation is always going to be there is an unknown natural cause, because at least we have evidence of those things existing, and that's going to be a better explanation.
So do you think in the hypothetical scenario I depicted, most scientists would not accept something like directed panspermia?
No, they would not, because again, there's no evidence of that. So the example you gave is impossible, but so like saying that if we have discovered literally all natural things ever and there's no longer any unknowns, and given that we know literally everything about everything, the probability of this happening is incredibly low.
Well, another way to look at it is that our confidence that undirected natural processes are not reasonably capable of producing life is like on par with, say, creating an automobile.
Well, again, to have that confidence, you would need to know literally all of them. Because if you don't, then it's always going to be better to say, oh, it's an unknown natural determining factor that caused this rather than a mind that has no evidence.
So if we found, like, say, an automobile on Pluto, that would not be sufficient evidence that this automobile was created by a
It's a
designing
false
intelligence
analogy
of some
because
sort.
all of the things in nature we know of that are automobiles are made by humans. So you could infer there's a human that did it somehow, maybe a time machine or something. But again, God would not be a plausible explanation there.
Well, that you
because he's
could
known
do
as
the
God.
same thing with life on Earth. You could say, well, maybe a time machine or something like that. It would be no reason to
Sure.
say that life on Earth wasn't created by designing
Sure.
intelligence.
Yes, you could do that. You could say that the DNA was designed by a guy who went into a time machine, a human being. Sure, you could say that, but it's still going to be less plausible in an unknown natural force.
Okay, and does that also hold true with an automobile if we found that on Pluto? That we would not be rationally justified in believing that this automobile is a result of artificial intervention?
Probably not, because in the case of automobiles, we only know that they're made by humans, whereas DNA, we know if it's possible. Like, I don't know. I'd say that it's probably impossible for automobiles to simply be created by the laws of physics. But we know it is possible in the case of minds, and so saying that a mind did it and used a time machine or something would be irrational but possible, whereas we don't know any possible explanation.
Now, in my scenario, I said that our confidence that undirected natural processes were not reasonably capable of producing life on Earth are at the same level as an automobile.
False analogies.
And you're saying
so you can't make any comparisons to any human designed anything, or it's a false analogy by default, because all human designed things are, but we know they're human designed, so it's a false analogy. Every time any intelligent design proponent says it's like a mousetrap or car or plane, false analogy immediately. So let's try to go to the actual argument. Why do you think that whatever minds thinking in terms of reality is any more likely under a god than under naturalism?
I've already explained my position.
You have not. You can ask anyone in the audience. You have not. You think God has some determining nature that he wants moral beings, and therefore he designs this into nature. Okay, we can say that quantum fields have this determined factor that causes them to do it too. Probabilities are the same. Why is this a problem?
I've already explained my position. I'll see if I can try a different tact. So my point is, okay, with say the automobile on Pluto, you say, well, that's evidence that because we know humans.
You're not allowed to use any human designed things.
I'm trying to use an analogy to help explain my point of view.
Okay, for any analogies, you're not allowed to use any human designed things, any human words, anything humans built. None of those are allowed. Go.
Why am I not allowed to do that?
Because it's a false analogy for the reasons I've already
I don't
explained.
think it is, because
I don't care if you think it is. It is provably the case. It's written into academic textbook. This is the case. You don't get an opinion on this. So try to make an analogy work by not using a human designed thing. And the fact that you can't proves it's fallacious.
I really don't think you're understanding my arguments here.
I fully understand it. I've already debunked it. So again, demonstrate your analogy without using a human design thing. And the fact that you can't do it shows it's fallacious.
Human design thing. The reason, no, I don't. I'm not sure I agree with that.
I don't care. You literally can't. Like, this has been proven. This is in the academic textbooks of why intelligent design is pseudoscience. All of your analogies only work based off of this intuition.
It's not been
things. So try to use a non-human design thing. Go.
Well, again, I would say that that in that hypothetical scenario, if we did discover that type of evidence that I mentioned,
okay, give me an example of a non-human design thing where there's a similar scenario that indicates a mind. Go.
In that hypothetical scenario I mentioned.
We're not using yours because yours is false. So do you have a different one? Do you have one that actually qualifies as evidence that doesn't beg the question using a human design thing?
I don't think it does beg the question.
I don't care. Do you have anything else that doesn't beg the question? Can you even logically possibly conceive of any possible scenario that isn't using a human design thing to beg the question for a mind? Can you give any possible scenario for your argument without a human design thing? Can you even do that?
I can't think of any off the top of my head. But
you don't
realize
the purpose why that's a problem.
I don't think it is. I don't think your objections are successful. So my point,
this is trying to make some kind of generalized argument that indicates that there is some kind of truth of the universe, but the only kinds of arguments that you can use to try to support it are of human designed things, and you don't understand why this is a problem.
No, I don't think you're quite correctly understanding the argument. My purpose of the analogy was to kind of illustrate my point of view.
Right, and you can't illustrate it with anything that isn't a human design thing. You don't see why that's a problem.
Well, I think that God having the version of theism where God would have moral agents, that seems more likely to me, just as it would be that theism is more likely that we would have moral agents interacting with each other. Now we can disagree.
Well, the question is why do you think God having a particular nature, God's nature is fine-tuned to have this nature, is a more plausible explanation than the quantum field being fine-tuned to have a nature that determines us to have this thing? Because again, us being able to have minds that describe reality is not like a car. It's not like a language. There's nothing about this that is in any way different than what we would expect in nature. There's nothing about this that is a designed aspect. Minds describe reality. In fact, that's something we would expect under evolution, as is the simplest case. So there's no reason to think this is something that would be out of the what we would expect nature to do on its own. There's no reason to think that. It's like saying, oh, look, we see a hydrogen atom. Oh, well, I'd expect that under a mind more likely than nature. Like, no, you wouldn't. That's dumb. So the same thing would apply here to minds having ideas that correspond to reality. There's no reason to think that's more likely with a mind than it is with some determining factor in nature.
So I disagree for the same reason I don't think it works in the fine-tuned meteor shower scenario, because intuitively it seems like the fine-tuned meteor shower is more likely the result of a mind than if it were not.
Well, this is why I already addressed this, where I said the words we intuitively think are more likely of a mind, because words are things we know minds make. That's it. So
that's true.
Can you make any examples without using a human design thing? No, which shows your analogy fails. We don't know of any minds who make conscious ideas correspond to reality. There are no examples of minds who do that. There has never been an example of a mind who does that. There's not a thing. We have examples of minds making cars. We have examples of minds making languages. We have no examples of minds making ideas correspond to reality. It does not happen.
Well, that's true. We have no experiences of minds creating a universe to develop psychophysical harmony. However, just like in the case of the fine-tuned meteor shower, it seems like the sort of thing that a mind would more likely to do.
No, it doesn't. It literally doesn't.
What doesn't?
There is no more likely probability here. When you say a mind is more likely to do this, you're begging the question of saying the mind has a particular nature to do this, which
you don't think it is that the fine-tuned meteor shower scenario mind is more likely to
actualize those fine-tuned to say that there could be lots of different kinds of minds, and there are a few logically possible ones that would want that. Most of them would not. The probability of a mind who would want that is equally as low as the probability of a quantum field who would be determined to do that. So the probability of a
meteor shower scenario. All right. Well, then we kind of just agree to disagree. Our kind of disagreement is differing intuitive perceptions on what is more likely to happen if the universe were a product of a mind than if it were not.
By likely, we mean logically possible.
No, I don't mean that. I mean epistemic probability. Do you know what epistemic probability is?
What do you mean by this? Because there's no epistemic probability of God. We have no basis of it whatsoever. So how do you trying to get that there is a mind?
In philosophy, epistemic probability is kind of the probability of evidential relations among propositions.
Yes, now, and there is no evidential relation to God. So wait, stop. So logically possible. Let's just go with something simple. Logically possible. If we see a moon with writing on it of any kind, and we take all logically possible minds and all logically possible quantum fields, does one have a greater possibility of creating a moon with writing on it than the other? What one category?
Now, by possibility, are you referring to logical possibility?
That's what I said. Logical possibility is the very first thing.
Well, they're both logically possible. I don't think they're equally probable. I think a design would be
more. That's the question.
Probable.
Why do you think that of all logically possible minds and all logically possible universes, that the minds one has a higher probability of producing the moon with words on it?
Okay. And now this is what our intuitive perceptions differ. Intuitively, it seems that if there were a mind behind the universe, that the fine-tuned meteor shower is more likely to occur than if we're not the product of a mind. Now, our intuitive perceptions differ on that.
Intuitive perceptions have zero effect on logical possibility, so that's a failed argument. So how do logically possible, of all logically possible worlds, why is there more logically possible worlds with this outcome under all logically possible minds than under all logically possible quantum fields?
Are you aware that you can have like different level? You can have, for example, do you believe that the set of natural numbers is equal in cardinality to the set of integers in general?
Yes, I'm familiar with how infinites work.
So, well, the reason is I say, okay, it might be that the number of logical possibilities have the same cardinality, But even so, I don't think they have the same probability. They
Yes,
both have
I understand, but how?
probability.
Why? That's the question. Isn't I understand that you're saying that it's more likely under one, but the question is why do you think that? So here's just a basic argument for you of why you're wrong. All all logically possible minds have a particular set of desires, presumably, and we'll just assume that, and those desires could correspond to every one of the logically possible quantum fields. So the quantum fields could create a universe with a moon with these words, and a mind could create a universe with a moon with these words, and the quantum field could make a universe of nothing but puppies, and there could be a mind that makes a universe of nothing but puppies. And so there's a one-to-one correlation for the entire set of minds and the kind of universes they would create, and the quantum fields and the kind of universes they would create. Therefore, they have an equal set probability of cardinality of what things they would create. And so there's a one-to-one probability for every possible universe they could create, and the probability of every possible universe they create.
I disagree. I don't think they have an equal probability. You could say, well, here are the number of possibilities, and maybe that's true. I think it's when you're dealing with infinities and like specific propositions, I think it'd be really hard to say that each one has a one-to-one correspondence. But at any rate, these are our points of our intuitive divergence.
Intuitive doesn't matter here. This is logically possible. Intuitions are have zero relevance here.
Well, they do matter because you and I have different intuitive perceptions, and that is how we are arriving at different conclusions.
Well, I'm not using intuition as an argument here. You are. So your argument has that problem. Mine doesn't. I'm simply saying
not exactly.
For each possible kind of universe that could ever be, this universe could come about from a quantum field, or it could come about from a mind. And any possible universe a mind could have a determined desire to create, there could be a quantum field that could have a determined field to create it. And so for every logically possible type of all logical possible universes, the probability that that universe came about by a mind without any other evidence is exactly the same as it coming about by a quantum field without any other evidence.
I disagree. So, I don't think your probabilities are quite correct. You're assuming
again, you've given no evidence of
probable.
Why. I gave an argument
disagree
for
with your assumption that because you can attach just like one naturalist explanation with a design explanation, that therefore they're equally probable.
Whoa,
that assumption I don't agree with.
So again, knowing nothing else, all we know is here is a universe X poofs out of nothingness. And there are potential explanations of this universe X, mind or quantum field. If we know nothing else, then the probability is the same under both, right? In order to have something that indicates God more than the quantum field, you'd have to say there is some property in this universe that happens more likely under a mind than under quantum fields, right? That's kind of where your argument's going. So what we would need is we need to know something about the mind, or the kinds of things minds do, that if there is a mind, it has a more likely probability to do X or something. But to know that, we would have to know something about the class of minds we're talking about. So if we know, for example, if gods existed, they would all make blue puppies, and there was a blue puppy, we could say that's more probable under a god. But guess what? We don't have that. We have no evidence of what minds do that are outside of space-time. Zero evidence of that. And so we can make no assumptions about what kinds of universes it would create versus not create. And so if we had zero evidence of quantum physics, which we don't, we actually have lots of evidence of quantum physics, we could say the same thing. We have no idea what kinds of universes quantum fields would create versus not create. And so if we saw a moon with writing on it, since we have no idea what the God mindy things are like, and we have no idea what the quantum field determinant factors are like, we can't say that it's more probable under one than the other, because all we have is logical possibility. We don't know what either are like intrinsically. Now you want to beg the question and think you have some idea of God is intrinsically like X. We have some determining factor, which is fine, but we can do the same thing under quantum fields. We can make up that quantum fields have some determining factor where any quantum field will create a moon with writing on it. Therefore, the probability of if we see a moon with writing on it is actually more likely under a quantum field than a mind. The only reason it's intuitively different is because writing is a human-made thing, and so we intuitively feel writing is made by a mind because it's a false analogy. But in either case, we can prove deductively the statistics are the same unless you can actually show some evidence of the God mind thing to know it has a particular nature, which you can't.
So you and I have differing now, this is not an argument. I'll preface that. This is not an argument. This is an explanation of where we disagree. Now, it seems to me, my intuitive perceptions tell me that the fine-tuned meteor shower scenario, if we found that fine-tuned meteor shower, it is more likely if they were a product of a mind than if we're not. And you disagree, based
No, I
on
agreed.
various
I
assumptions
agreed.
that I don't agree with.
No, I agreed with that because it's written by words. Remember, words correspond. Humans make words, so I agreed that our intuitions are more likely that if we see words, it's caused by a mind because it's a false analogy. I agreed with that part.
I thought you said if we had that, then we could just as easily conceive of a naturalistic processes just happen to have those parameters, just as like we
Well,
can
no. I
have.
said I agreed that our intuitions are the case that if we see words, we think mind.
Okay, you just don't think that intuition is vertical in the case of the fine-tuned meteor shower, correct?
Right. It wouldn't correspond to reality necessarily. Well, yeah,
Right.
something like that.
So, so as an explanation of where we disagree, my intuitive perception is that this type of meteor shower text is more likely to occur if there are mind behind the universe than if we're not. And I think that any argument that says otherwise is likely false. Now, your arguments do not convince me. But yes, we can kind of agree to disagree on that. So on the issue of,
I deductively disproved you, so it's not a degree.
I
It's not an
disagree that
agree
you
to disagree.
deductively disprove
I'm
because
sure.
I
I'm
don't
sure you
agree
do.
with all your
'Cause,
premises.
well, your arguments based on intuitions, mine are based on deductive logics. But okay. Do you have any other arguments?
Well, we're both using intuitive perceptions when coming to that. You're assuming that
I didn't use any. None of mine are based on intuition. I don't base intuition on any of my arguments, other than the existence of morality. That's the only one I do that on.
But you did kind of assume that because we have a kind of a logically possible unit for naturalistic process creating a certain effect, and we could conceive of a mind producing a certain effect, and therefore they're equally likely. My intuition does not match up with that.
Well, I didn't. None of that was based on intuition. That's based on logical possibility. So I'm saying logically possible of all possible ways. Quantum fields could be in all possible ways. Minds could be. The logical possibility is a set 1-to-1 of all possible universe. So there's no intuition there whatsoever.
Well, there is one intuition. You're assuming that because the logical possibilities match up 1-to-1, that therefore they're equally probable.
But
right?
No, that is literally what I mean. The cardinality is the same, and we can prove that because there's a set of all logically possible universes, and a mind could particularly want any of those things. And if we have no evidence of the mind having a particular set of desires, then the a priori likelihood they would want any one universe over the other is exactly the same. So there's no intuitions there.
That is the intuition. You're assuming that all those possibilities are all equally likely. And
no,
I'm
this is
not
the same.
convinced by that.
If we don't have any evidence to the contrary, we don't have any evidence that one set is more likely, then a priori they are by definition equally likely.
And I would say that kind of reasoning.
Not an intuition.
Well, that is what your intuition tells you. Your intuition is telling you that because of these.
That's literally just what Bayesian epistemology says. It has nothing to do with intuition. Do you have a different argument? Because this one's boring.
All right. So our point of intuitive divergence is whether that
straw man. I don't use intuitions. Do you have a different argument?
So our point of intuitive divergence is
straw man. I don't use intuitions. Do you have a different argument?
If you stop it, I mean,
if you stop straw manning me, like I don't use intuitions.
Okay, our point of intuitive divergence.
Stop saying that. Stop straw manning me. I'm just going to kick you off. Do you have a different argument?
Our point of intuitive divergence
Stop
is with
saying
morality.
That. I'm going to kick you off. Last warning. Do not ever say I use intuitions again, or you're straw man. I mean, you're kicked off.
Okay, well, we disagree on whether we're using intuitions in our arguments.
Yes. Do you have a different argument now?
All right, so I think we've kind of gotten to a point for our disagreement. So we have a disagreement on whether morality.
Arguments? Do you have any other arguments?
Not for this discussion. No.
Okay, fair enough.
So we disagree on whether morality, as I have defined it, exists. I believe it exists, and you do not. I believe
in morality. Straw man.
No, I said I said what we disagree on whether morality, as I have defined it, exists. I think it does, and you do not. Use a different definition of morality.
Yes, you disagree on morality as I have defined it exists. So,
and in my opinion, something like a fine-tuned meteor shower scenario, in the fine-tuned meteor shower, it seems more likely to me that it would more be a product of design than if we're not. We didn't quite get into. I guess we delved a little bit in the psychophysical harmony and software universe. To me, it seemed more likely that it would more more product design and you do not. And yeah, I guess we can leave it there. Those are our disagreements.
Sure. Except I provided evidence and arguments, and you provided intuition. So mine's better. All right. Did you want to give any links or references to your work so people can find you and other stuff?
Oh yeah. So Maverick Christian, I have a Maverick Christian YouTube channel. There's that.
Anything else?
Oh no, that's it.
All right, cool. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. And talk to you later.